That's carried. Now we'll go to the easy one, options for addressing water quantity and quality for Christchurch groundwater. Got Emma Davis, Helen Beaumont. Brent, do you want to come down to the table, because I'm sure there might be the odd legal question for you. Now we've got some additional recommendations that have come. So if I just run through these, and then perhaps if I invite you to move them, are these where you were at, Vicky?
So it may be that all needs to be strengthened, but we'd like to listen to what you've got to say first.
All right. So we were asked to prepare a paper looking at the options for seeking a water conservation order.
Yes.
And also consider what other strategic options there may be that we could use to address this issue. And Helen's going to speak shortly, because she attended yesterday a central government workshop on the review of Three Waters, and particularly talk about the option of the National Environment Standards for drinking water, and how that might be a mechanism. So I would just ask that in considering the options that we've got available, we really need to be thinking about resourcing, and thinking about where we the trade-offs if we pursue a water conservation order, or whichever option we look at pursuing, they will require a great deal of resourcing. So just ask that in considering the options, you think about that in terms of where we put our expertise and time into looking at these various options.
So yesterday the Department of Internal Affairs, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry for the Environment all sent officials down to Canterbury for the workshop on the Three Waters review. This one is not so much about the delivery of Three Waters services as it is about the regulatory framework. So as part of the regulatory framework for potable water supply, there's clear recognition that we need to improve the protection of source water, and that is for both quality and quantity. So the Ministry for the Environment have said that what they want to do is bring in stronger obligations on regional councils to consider drinking water supplies, community drinking water supplies in their consenting decisions, and they want to bring new obligations in on regional councils to work with drinking water suppliers in terms of the future. So both of those two things work in our favour, if you like, in terms of the primary purpose here is to see the aquifer as a resource for community drinking water supply into the future, rather than for other, perhaps less valuable uses of such a pristine water supply. And I suspect that the mechanism for this will be the National Environmental Standard, as Emma pointed out, because that is under review at the moment. So in terms of mechanisms, the National Environmental Standard is focused on drinking water supply, whereas the Water Conservation Order is really focused on the intrinsic values of the water body and its ecosystem values, rather than its values for use. What we are users of the water.
Standard. We already have one.
Yes, we already have one, and it's under review.
And does it? I mean, I'm just wondering whether what's absent from the resolutions is and I know we've got inviting the Minister for the Environment for a discussion on water issues, but after the last one, I just wondered whether we would want to have a specific one that we write to the Minister for the Environment and request that the work that's being done on the standard be hastened, and that it be strengthened in order to protect our drinking water supply.
Yes, and particularly to focus on both quality and quantity, as is pointed out in the report.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Would you be comfortable with a resolution that does that as well? I mean, I'm not saying, and I wouldn't say that consider inviting. I think we should just invite him. So we'll just have it, invite him, and then could somebody put some wording together for the yeah, but I'm not worried about that. I'm just no. I want to put it in writing to him about our concerns about the current one, the length of time that it's taking to review it, and what we want to achieve out of it. So, have they put a discussion document out on it yet? Or
Not that I'm aware of.
no. So that's a real slow track.
But I think that we could reference the work that they're doing under the Three Waters Review and acknowledge that they've got a focus on protection of source water.
Yep.
And that we're particularly concerned on both quality and quantity
Yes.
of the source water.
Okay.
Well, maybe the glaciers have overtaken it in terms of the regional council one as well. So that needs to be on an urgent plan change. Because it's currently 2022 or 23.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
We'll work on some wording up here, but anyway, so write to the Minister to request that work on the, what is it called, the National Environmental Standard on for sources of human drinking water.
That's correct.
Be hastened and I've got and strengthened, but it's
And broadened
and
to include both
broadened
quality and quantity.
to broaden to include both the quality and quantity of drinking water.
Groundwater, because the existing one has quite a strong emphasis on surface water. I don't know, Helen, whether there's some words we want to emphasise it needs to be secure or cover groundwater appropriately, because that's a tricky one.
Sourced from groundwater, is that, I mean, Helen, do you think?
Well, you could add particularly for groundwater sources.
Particularly for groundwater sources. Right. Yep. Yes?
This is for you, Brent. Just in relation to 4, which suggests going forward on a water conservation order for a whole host of reasons, is there a way that we could actually bring that quicker than by September?
Probably not. I'd be reluctant to recommend bringing it forward. I'd be reluctant to recommend the resolution itself. I'll expand on that if you'd like me to. But I'd be reluctant to recommend bringing forward that date because, as is highlighted in the staff report on page 186 of the agenda, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of technical work, planning work, legal work, involving a number of disciplines before those options can be fully
And the water
fleshed out.
guys are pretty busy at the moment,
Yes.
and you guys. Okay, that's
Now
that's okay.
the reason why I suggested that I'd be reluctant to recommend the resolution itself is because, as is hopefully apparent from the staff report, it's not a staff recommendation that there be an application for a water conservation order.
I understand that
because of the resource implications, because it's not a good fit as a tool for the council's objectives.
Well, I think that's probably a council decision in terms of our priority on our water aquifers. Yeah.
what the advice is.
I totally
yeah.
get that. But your concern was staff resource, and our concern might be quite a different concern.
My principal criteria in giving advice on use of a legal tool to achieve an outcome or a regulatory tool is how good is the fit of that tool to the outcome that's being sought. Now, as you've heard from the planning advice just now, a better tool is the National Environmental Standard.
And both are very long in the making. But this one you could, because in the report you talk about possible perverse outcomes
Yes.
of restricting our own ability to take from Aquifer 4 and 5 if we applied for those ones. Is there a way in which it could be worded, and I guess that's part of the work that will be done, isn't it?
Yes.
Such that we seek a conservation order that doesn't restrict the community take.
Yes, it is possible. I have, since this report was finalised, I have seen some precedents for a water conservation order that allows a take for community purposes.
Thank you very much.
So it is feasible, but what we don't know is whether the outcome would be the one that the council seeks, because the council obviously loses control of this process. The council lodges an application, council's not the decision maker on it. It's going to be the hearings panel or the Environment Court in the end who make the decision, and that decision may impose more limits than what this council would have sought.
Right, okay, I get that. Okay, thank you.
Pauline and then Aaron.
Yeah, just on 5 there, you know, you're saying that to apply for a conservation order would take a long time and be costly. So can we get some idea of both of those statements in the report back, please? Because all of these options that we've got in front of us will take a long time, so we need to have a relative comparable figure on those, if we could.
I mean, we've got some experience where the application for the Waikarepupu Springs, that was actually initially lodged in 2013, and then it was rejected because of insufficient information. And then it was not before, it was until 2017 that they actually resubmitted that application to get all that information together for it to be accepted. And now it's been 2 years since then for them to actually have had the hearings, and the tribunal have not yet submitted it to the Minister for the Environment. So that, as an example, has been going on since 2013. Now, that's an example of a water conservation order for a spring.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, if we lodged one, I'd say that we would use that as a template and make sure that we get the application probably more robust. So at least 2 years, so it's probably what you're talking about. So how long do the other avenues take? An NES or MPs? They're very long processes as well.
Yeah. The government is proposing having the regulatory system, the overall regulatory system for water supply in a cabinet paper in June, and then drafting regulations in the latter part of 2019, and that would include using tools such as the National Environmental Standard for Source Water Protection.
And the Minister was explicit when it was actually the Minister for Local Government. She said that it would cover source protection as well.
That's right. So, and then that would go through the process early in 2020. So it would be in place in legislation is likely to be in place before the end of 2020.
Yeah.
So that's already on a fast track.
So do you know how many other areas around New Zealand have aquifer source drinking water as opposed to surface water source?
The primary ones would be Napier, Lower Hutt, and then a number of others in Canterbury using the Canterbury aquifers.
I've got Aaron and then Phil.
Yeah, Helen, did I hear you say less valuable use in about halfway through of water? Did you use that term? And I
did.
What does that refer to?
If you've got a pristine water source that is already
like
suitable for drinking water, that's a very high value use for it. We also use it to flush toilets in hose off cars, but
Driveways.
for drinking water, that's probably its most valuable use in terms of, you know, the social, health, economic outcomes for that. Whereas if you're using it in an industrial setting where you're only using it for wash water, I would say that was a lower value use. So it's looking at what the potential users of that water are and what the best value the country gets out of it.
Yes, okay. So that's got a long way to go, I'm thinking.
Well, that's partly why the regulatory framework wants to recognise the importance of community supplies. So at the moment, you're aware that under the Resource Management Act, it's first come, first served. And so what this is proposing to do is say, look, community drinking water supplies are more important than that. And so we want planning instruments to take that into account, that is a very important high value use for the country. It's the health of the people.
Yeah, so they're looking at a nationwide plan because places like us and Napier and things have really massive supplies of that very high quality water, but we, like you say, use it to wash driveways and cars and everything else. So about 1% is probably drunk, if that.
So including surface water supplies. So they're looking at catchment protection as well for surface waters as well as groundwaters.
But those other cities...
So yes, it is national.
Yeah, but those other populations don't... Their water's rubbish compared to ours, and well, you can taste it, you can smell it in the shower. It's terrible, let's be honest. Would a national program look at sharing the water from areas like ours for the drinking standards and doing something else around industrial usage, for instance? Or does it not go that far?
It would look at what priority you put on community drinking water supplies compared to the availability of the resource, which would vary in different parts of the country. And
does part of that discussion like starting to use grey waters and stormwater catchments and so on and so forth?
Potentially, but that's more on the drinking water supplier side. So that would be a decision for us as a drinking water supplier as to whether we provide dual supplies for some townships, for example, where potable water is in very short supply.
Phil? Mike?
I'm just sort of a bit concerned that we're asking sort of for, or we might be putting the cart before the horse. For example, in getting a lot of information on the water conservation order, which is really challenging, at the same time, get central government to come out with the review of the National Environment Standards. And especially if we have some discussions with the Minister, is it not possible that we might be able to resolve our water supply issues more through the National Environment Standards changes?
Yes. In short, yes.
And that's your recommendation, that we take that rather than the dual approach?
I concur with Brent that that is a better instrument. That's what it's designed for. It's designed for the protection of drinking water sources.
Mike?
Thanks. Obviously this is around the quantity and quality. A water conservation order on aquifers could obviously control the take moving forward, but in terms of the quality, does it actually have any control on the activities in the surrounding land? Potentially, say in North Canterbury, where there's obviously an issue with nitrates.
Yeah, that is part of the work that we would need to do and other experts would need to do in order to prepare some options for a water conservation order application, where there would need to be a lot of work done on how one would control the discharge of contaminants to groundwater.
Because reports that I've read said it was a little bit limited in the fact that it couldn't control activities on the surrounding land.
I can't answer that off the top of my head, sorry.
And I guess another question, like if we went down this path, could it be seen as a stepping away from local control?
As a tool, what we are talking about for a water conservation order is basically a regulation that's made by central government. That's what we're talking about.
Yep.
And you can compare that to a regional plan.
Yep.
Right. So there's no more questions. So, Vicky, you want to? Oh, yeah.
On the process, is it possible to put number 5 separately?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Moved and seconded. So moved Vicky Buck, seconded Pauline Cotter. And I'm going to be putting number 5 separately. All right. So I'll open it up for discussion. Sarah?
The quality and quantity of our drinking water supply is a core concern of council. And we've been really clear over many years that we want to keep control of that. So while I think that the work is really important, I think that number 5 with the water conservation order both doesn't use our resources as strategically as possible and also sends the wrong message to central government that we want them to come and step in. So I will be voting in favour of 1, 2, 3 and 4, but not 5 today.
Pauline, Yanni, Phil.
Yeah, I'm going to support the entire resolution because I think that it's going to be an interesting test case anyway, and I look forward to just getting the information back from staff that we've requested there, and particularly around a potential risk to any council draw for their community use. The Simpson-Grierson report states that that Christchurch groundwater is likely to fit into the RMA framework for a water conservation order. And our aquifers are unique. As we've heard, most places around New Zealand have surface water draws for their drinking water. We've got various issues that could be addressed through this, like how many water bodies are there in our aquifers? Are they one or are they more than one? The primary concern is the protection of our drinking water. It could have effects on things like how much we draw from the Waimakariri River, actually, which does recharge our aquifers. So I think this is an interesting test case. Currently there's no water conservation order around an aquifer, and I think it might be a long process, but it's certainly one potentially worth embarking on. The response to 5 will determine whether we do. And we do have an obligation for our future generations to be alert to the risks to our beautiful, pristine aquifers. So I'm going to support this today and see what comes back from 5.
Yanni?
Thank you. I absolutely support number 5. I think it's essential that we do everything we can do to protect our water for the quality and for the community water supply and also for future generations. So, you know, this is asking staff to further investigate it. It's not the decision to do it. It is a decision to get staff to look at it in more detail, and I strongly support that. I do not believe we can rely on central government. If you look at the current situation we're in and look at where we've got, that I believe is a large degree due to central planning mechanisms and regulations that do not give adequate protection, I believe, to our water. So I think it's essential we do engage with central government and we do make the case, but I don't think that should mean that we don't do the other work around the water conservation order. We have to do this, in my view, and we can get a fuller report back. I was hoping we could do it before September, but I appreciate that staff have given that advice, but I think it's essential we get on and do both of these things, not just one or the other.
Yep. Phil?
I'm actually inclined to not support 5 on the basis that there's a lot of information in the report that, in fact, to achieve the water conservation order, there's a huge, not only amount of work to be done, but a long way to go, and it's not necessarily achievable. And I think we're better to focus our resources between what we're doing between 1 and 4. I just think what we have to do has to be achievable, and I think it seems to me the water conservation order is just not particularly workable to achieve our ends.
Yep. So, well, I'll let you wind up the debate. Does anyone else want to? Raf?
Just very quickly, I mean, listening to the staff advice, I see no reason to support item 5. It sort of sounds good, but I think actually the National Environmental Standard is the way to proceed, and I do worry about unintended consequences from constantly pursuing all these slightly random approaches to dealing with an issue where the water allocation is, we've discussed this again and again and again, it's fully allocated, there's no new allocations, and all the processes that are in place now to manage the water supply are the right ones. So I don't see that going down the water conservation order is a particularly good idea.
Glenn?
Thank you. This number 5 is about further investigate. It could be once we have the information back, it's not a goer, but I think we have to look at all the potential tools in the toolbox. So, look, let's try. You know, the only limits are in our minds, so let's go for it.
Anyone else? I'll get Vicky to close up, but I'll just say a word myself. Yeah, I was in two minds about 5. I think if it had gone further than this, I wouldn't have supported it. But the reason that I am going to support it is because when we raised it with the Minister for the Environment, he was taken aback and was intrigued, I think, with the concept of an aquifer being treated as subject to a water conservation order. I was really nervous when I read the paper about the implications, but I think to do some further work doesn't actually mean that we're heading off down making the final decision. So I don't mind some extra work to be reported back. It does mean that if there is a decision to go further than that, then it really will be I think put to the next council, and I think that's appropriate. So I'll let Vicky wind up the debate.
I think it's really important as a council that we deal with every possible way that we can to protect our water. We do have a unique resource, and it is unchlorinated, and we want it to be unchlorinated for a very long time, and we've seen what can happen from the current rules. So what potentially could this stop? And all we're asking is that this be investigated. Potentially it could stop the switch from Aquifer 1 to Aquifer 5 on existing consents, even though they may be defunct. And that's really important in the Christchurch scene. And it's really important that we take some action now. This council will still be around, and people will still be drinking water in 3 years' time or 4 years' time or 5 years' time, whenever this may come to pass, assuming that we go ahead with it. All we're asking for is the work to be done. At the moment, we face a huge problem of our deep aquifers being contaminated with nitrates. We know that they're coming under the Waimak, we know that they're there, and we can't stop them coming. And we have to stop them coming, so we have to deal with the land use of other areas. I don't know if the National Environmental Standards will do that. The NES may not deal with our particular problems, but we have to do something. I can guarantee you that the report back from the Waimak ZIPA, or whatever they call themselves, is not going to solve the problem of the nitrates coming into your drinking water, nor the fact that the cost of remediating that problem is tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars, which was not taken into their economic considerations. We have unique aquifers 5 and possibly 4 in terms of what we have here. There are water conservation orders that exist in New Zealand already. They are a precedent. I accept the staff concern about possible unintended consequences, and that's why we go to an investigation and not to just directing the start of it. This is a long process, but that water has to last a really long time. So not doing something because potentially we have an issue of resources in our staffing, not dealing with water for that reason, is the worst possible reason that you could give to not deal with the fundamental essence of life. Countries will go to war over water. Countries are already at war over water, and that will increase dramatically as the climate disrupts. So we have to, as a council, actually do the things that people expect us to do. One of them, as a possibility, is a water conservation order. To simply say, no, it's too hard and we rely on the regional council or the government to solve our problems, let me just tell you, I'm not willing to rely on the Regional Council to solve our problems, and actually I don't know how long any government will be there to solve the problems. So actually, if you want to solve your problems, you have to look at every possible way that you as a council can do it. This is one way that is open to us. All we're asking is that we do a detailed investigation, comes back to this council in September, and we make the decision then. To not do that investigation is just appalling.
Right, thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Oh, this is on 1 to 4. Those opposed say no. That's carried. And then item number, paragraph 5 or resolution 5. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. So do you want to just flick up your hands for no? Ref, Jamie, Sarah, Mike, Aaron, Tim. Oh, what's that number? 6? Sorry.
6, and we've got 15 in the room.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's carried. Thank you very much. All right, we shall adjourn for lunch. So the question is whether we come back at 2. That would give us 45 minutes. Are people okay with 45 minutes for lunch? Okay, back here at 2 o'clock. Thank you.